Hi, in this tutorial we're going to send some Revit elements to Rhino and we're going to include the Revit properties in the Rhino geometry using Speckle. This tutorial will be done in 5 steps. In the first step we're going to start with the requirements to follow this tutorial. In the second step we're going to create a Speckle stream and send some data from Revit. In the third step we're going to receive that data in Grasshopper and then we're going to play with that data and define some object attributes in Rhino. And finally, we're going to color our geometry by its Revit properties, such as its type, its level, and its category, etc. So let's get started. So these are the general requirements to follow this tutorial. You must have Revit and Rhino installed in your device. I'm going to be using Revit 22 and Rhino 7. And you should have Speckle Manager and related Speckle connectors installed. So we're going to be using Grasshopper and Revit connectors, and they are installed via Speckle Manager. And for all this to work, obviously you should have a Speckle account. If you don't have one already, get one at speckle.xyz. And these are the Grasshopper related requirements. We're going to be using random color from Wombat package, and you can find that on Food for Rhino. And we're going to be using Elephant to define the attributes and to reference geometry from Rhino, etc. In this tutorial, I'm going to be using a sample project that comes with Revit. To access that, go to File, click on Open, and right below IFC Options, there is this button called Sample Files. And the project that we're going to use is right here, RSD_advanced sample project. So the first thing that we're going to do in Revit is we are actually going to create a new Speckle stream. To do that, let's go to Add-ins and click on Revit connector. And right now, there are no streams associated with this document. To add one, I'm going to click on this. And these guys right here are actually existing streams that I can associate with this document, or I can create a new one. Let's do that. I'm going to name mine as Advanced Sample Project and click on Create. And just like that, we have created a new Speckle stream. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to send these Revit elements to that stream. And it's quite easy actually. I'm just going to select them, click on this, and click on Set Selection. And if I click on Send and Send again, just like that, we have sent Revit elements to the Speckle stream. To receive those elements in Grasshopper, we will use a node called Receive, which you should be able to see if you installed your Speckle connector correctly. So this node expects a stream as a URL. So I'm going to go back to my server, speckle.xyz, and in the streams I have my advanced sample project, and I'm going to copy the URL and paste it in the Grasshopper as a string. Then I'm going to connect it as the stream input. As you see, the node is activated, and I'm going to click on Receive. And right now, the node is receiving the data. So let's examine what we have received as data. So I'm going to connect a panel to the data output. And what I'm seeing is a base Speckle object. To be able to see the content of this base object, we're going to use a node called Expand Speckle Object. So if I connect my data outputs as the inputs, what I'm seeing right now are the Speckle types or equivalents of Revit categories. So this means that I have, for instance, 5 floor elements in this stream. I have 6 walls. I have more than 200 columns, etc. So, these are the elements themselves, but, where are their properties, attributes? Where are its geometry? How can we access them? To do that, we're going to use the expand Speckle object again, but this time the input will be the Speckle types. So if I connect that object as the input, what I'm seeing on the right-hand side are the available fields that we can access in that element. Display mesh contains the geometry. The element ID is the unique identifier for this element. We have the family, level, type, etc. So for instance, for the columns, we have more fields that are available. We have the type, we have the element ID, display mesh, which is the geometry again, etc. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to, merge the categories that I want to have in my Rhino model. So I'm just going to search for merge. And I don't really need all the categories. I'm just going to need floors, columns, foundations, framing, and I think walls. So these are the only categories that I want to have in my model. I don't really need the rebar or stiffener, etc. So first we have to define which parameters that we want to have in our model. So again, I'm going to use the expand speckle object and connect the result as the input. And all of these are the available parameters. But what I really need is the geometry first, display mesh, and then I'm going to get the element ID, and the element ID will be the name of that element in Rhino. I'm going to need its level. Level is going to be an attribute. And I think I'm going to need the type, the Revit type of that element, and then I'm going to need the category, and the category will be the speckle type. So how can we access those parameters? I either can use, I can connect a panel and do all that kind of stuff from here, or there is a specialized node called speckle object value by key. So we're looking for a key, and in return it gives us the value of that key. So the key in this case, the first one will be the display mesh, which will contain the geometry. So I'm just going to connect the result as the object input, and the key will be display mesh. It is case sensitive, be careful. If I connect this as the key input, what I get is the geometrical representation of those objects. So I'm just going to copy and paste again. And this time I'm going to get their element ID. So the element ID will be the name. And then copy and paste again. And this time I'm going to get their type. So this type is the Revit type. I'm copy and paste again. This time I'm going to get their speckle type. So I'm just going to type in speckle underscore type. Okay. So what I get is Revit floor, Revit column, Revit wall, etc. These are, the category or the speckle type of that element, which we will add as a layer first, and as we can add it as a user attribute as well. But I think level is enough. Then last one will be the level. So the level is a bit different. Let me connect a panel to the value output and take a look at it. So what we get in return is actually another object. So these, the floors, columns, foundations, framing, etc. These are objects, and level is also an object. So we have to get, what we need is the name of the level. So I'm just going to expand that level object and see the keys that we have. So the name parameter is the one that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the same thing, but this time the input will be the level object, and what we're looking for is its name. So the output will be the level names. So just like that, we get what we want. We have the display mesh, which is the geometry. Let me delete this and take a look at it again. So display mesh, which is the geometry. We have the element ID. We have the type, speckle type, and level. So let's define these, keys and values as an attribute in Rhino. To do that, we're going to use a node called define object attributes. And it is actually under elephant and attributes. If you're not seeing this, this means that you haven't really installed elephant in Grasshopper. So let's define our user keys first. So I'm going to use a node merge. I'm going to merge my attributes, my type first, and again the level. So these two will be a user attribute. Display mesh will be the geometry, element ID will be the name input, and speckle type will be the layer input. So that is why I'm actually connecting only two keys. I'm just going to do merge again, and this time I'm going to connect the output. First the type and then the level. Let me delete this. Okay, so let's examine what we have as a result. What we have as a result is, in the first list I have all the types, and in the second list I have all the levels. But what I want to have is actually, I want to flip the matrix of this list, and in each list I want to have a type as the first element and the level as the second element. To achieve that, I either can flip the matrix or I can simply graft the inputs. So if I graft these inputs, what I will get is a 620 list. In each list, I have two items. The first one is the type, and the second one is the level. Let's connect that as the user values. So we're going to graft the name input and the layer input again, just for the same thing. So each of the items have a single name and a layer, which is the speckle type. And we have defined the attributes. Right now it is time to bake this geometry into Rhino. To do that, I'm going to use the node called bake objects. Just make sure that you're using the correct one, this one, which is under elephant and bake. So the geometry inputs will actually come from the display mesh attributes, and the attributes will come from here. I'm just going to flatten it just in case and connect it as the attributes input. Let's give it a name to our bake. So I'm just going to say it as Revit to Rhino with properties and connect this. And the bake input is actually expecting a Boolean. So I'm just going to connect a button and right click and name it as bake. Connect it as the bake input. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on it, and just like that, if I come over here and select one of the elements, its name is the element ID. Let's take a look at it. Each floor has a unique ID, and their level is the category of that element. So if I go to layers, for instance, these just comes by default. I'm going to delete them. So let me hide the floors, for instance. These, let me hide my grasshopper preview. Okay, so these are the walls, the beams, these are the foundations. Let me hide them, and columns and floors, etc. So we have more control over our geometry in Rhino by simply importing with some basic attributes. Let's take a look at it in detail. For instance, I'm going to select one of the columns and go to its user attributes. And as you see, its type is 415 millimeters radius, and its level is level 1. Let me select another one, the second floor. So the beauty is I can just right click in one of the attributes and select objects by value. So this way I have selected all the objects in this model that their level parameter, level property is, its value is the second floor. So let's do another one. For instance, I'm going to select one of the floors. I'm just going to go its type, right click, select objects by Q. And I can actually isolate those items. So these are the only elements that their type is the generic concrete 300 millimeters. Let me unhide that, and let's continue with the next part. So in this part, we're going to color our geometry by the embedded attribute values in them. So for instance, we can color the geometry by its type, by its level, and etc. So let's start with coloring by its type. I'm going to go back to Grasshopper and I'm going to create a blank definition. And if I select one of the geometries, as you see, they're all meshes. So I need to reference the meshes in my model, and using Elephant, it's really easy. I'm just going to type in reference by type, and I'm going to connect a value list as an input, which will give me all the available options that I have. And in this case, I just need to reference the meshes. And just like that, I have referenced all the meshes in my document. So as I said, we're going to color this geometry by its type attributes. So we need to get the user value of the type. So I need to get user value. I'm going to connect the geometry as the geometry input, and the key will be the type. And if I connect the type as the key, let me do it like that. What I will get is all the types of the geometries. And I need to create a color for each type. So first I need to create a set, which will give me, all the types in my model. I only have 15 distinct types. And the next step will be creating a color for each type. And to achieve that, I'm going to use a node called random color from Wombat package. And the data input will be my set, and the output will be a 15 unique colors for each type. And then I'm going to use list item, and from this list of colors, I'm going to use the map as the index value. So each item will have its own color. And just like that, we have the RGB value for those colors. Let's define that as an attribute. To define it, we're going to use the define object attributes again, and the color input will be this. So we already have the geometry and the information in the model, and what we need to do is we need to modify the existing attributes. So to achieve that, I'm just going to go to Elephant, and under attributes, I have modify Rhino object attributes again, and the attributes will be this. And whether if we want to modify or not, and obviously we want to modify, I'm going to connect a boolean. It's going to be true, and the geometry will come from the meshes. And just like that, we have colored our model by their types. All the elements that are part of the same type are in the same color. For instance, these columns, they're all the same. This frame, structural framing element, and this one are two different type of elements. We can, visually distinguish them from each other. It is as simple as, after we have the definition, we can actually, update the information that we want to look for. Instead of using the type as a reference, we can actually color them by their level, just like that. All the elements that are part of the same level, that their level parameter has the same value, are colored the same. Or we can color them by their category. And since we defined the layer as the category, you need to get the layer information from the geometry. And I think it is a Rhino attribute. So I'm going to click on Get Rhino Attributes, which will give me the layer. And if I connect this as this list input, it's going to tell me that it is an elephant layer. So we have to convert that into a string. I'm simply going to connect a panel to the layer output and connect this as the list input. And just like that, all the elements that are part of the same layer are colored the same. So in this video, we have sent some Revit elements to Rhino, and we have included the Revit properties in the Rhino geometry and used that to color our model. So thanks for watching, and if you have any recommendations for a future tutorial, just let us know in the comment section below, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.